The landlords. I think that's the hottest topic. Okay, so what do you need from your landlord to apply for, say, housing allowance? Because I think they have to be involved in that process one way or the other.
Yeah, the main document is the rent agreement. And then you need some more confirmations, but again, depending on your exact situation. So it's always good to ask at the authority you're asking for the allowance, what documents they need, and it's also important to know whether the signature has to be notarized or whether normal signature is enough for these documents that you have to provide the authorities.
And they also have to provide you with the documents that are needed at the MOI, right?
Yeah.
The ministry.
Yeah, it's the same.
Now, I've heard these stories about landlords coming into their apartments. You are taking a shower and you hear a door opening. You're like, who the hell is opening my door? Or you are sleeping on your bed and landlord has just come into your house. Is that even legal?
Well, it's criminal acting from the side of the landlord. He cannot enter the property without your consent.
This is scary.
This shall not happen. Because, well, it's if this happens, you just call the police and there's going to be a criminal proceeding against your landlord. Because he has it's not legal to come into your place because you're renting and you're paying for that, and he cannot come just without your permission and without your approval. It just, even a notice that he's coming is not enough.
Sometimes they use the excuse of, I needed to fix something, repairs in the apartment, or when it's a shared apartment, they want to show their other space to new tenants.
Yeah, but this should have to be agreed in the contract. And yes, landlord has right to come from time to time to check the property, whether everything is working well, but there always has to be an agreement when he comes for this. If there are people coming, as we have discussed before, or checking the meters, water meters and electrometers, gas meters, so again you have to let them in, but they cannot come in without your consent. This is not possible.
Yeah, because that's just scary, especially for these women. You are here alone in a foreign country and someone has a key in your apartment and they walk in whenever they want. It's really not okay.
Yeah, the best solution is what I always recommend to my clients is to change the lock, to have your own key, and to put one key in a sealed envelope for situations you are on vacation and there's water leaking and they have to go into the flat to stop the water. But it's a sealed envelope so that both parties, you and also the landlord, cannot use the key, and you can check that your landlord has not used the key.
So you are allowed to change the locks in the apartment when you move in?
It's just not forbidden. You can change the lock and have your own key for your protection, because you never know who has the key and
who's lived here.
Yeah, who lived there, whether the previous tenant still has the key and can come. I hope this is not happening too often. Well, it's illegal, so call the police in such case.
Now the repairs, most landlords sometimes will refuse to offer repairs to apartments where tenants live in. You'll hear people saying they have been without hot water or something for like a week. It's cold, it's freezing outside, it's snowing. How can you live without hot water or no heating? Oh my God, I would die. No heating.
Me too. Well, yes. It's there's a special legal degree or a special law that states what are the obligations of the tenant to repair and what are the obligations of the landlord.
Okay.
So based on this document, it's stated who is responsible for the repairs. And if there is such a situation that you have no heating and it's minus 20 outside, so you should ask for discount in your rent. And whether it's a situation that you cannot live in the property, there has to be a huge reconstruction in the property during your rent agreement because of an accident with the gas heating. So the landlord should provide you some other alternative where to stay.
Yeah, I saw this post where they were doing repairs in an apartment for 2 weeks, and the landlord just said the person should find a place to stay and didn't want to reimburse or lower the rent for that month. And this person had to get an Airbnb for 2 weeks, costing like over 10,000, and then you still have to pay the full monthly rent.
Yeah, so if In case you cannot use the property you are paying rent for, so you should not pay the rent because you cannot use it.
Right.
Set off it against the rent and not pay the rent if you were not allowed or if it was not possible to use the property.
They're so quick to say if you cannot oblige, then leave. Because they have this upper hand due to the supply and demand. They know they will find another person to live tomorrow or today. People are always looking for apartments, so they're so quick to say leave my apartment or you take it or leave it kind of thing.
The market situation is like this. I always recommend to my clients negotiate your situation because for landlord it's much easier to keep you than to find someone else with no guarantee that it will work.
So I think the most important point here is for people to read their contract and see what is written there, what are the clauses that are hidden that may come to bite them in the ass later on.
Yeah, I know it's difficult, and it's difficult also for Czech people just to read the contracts, to know all their rights and obligations that are stated. It's not only civil code, there are like 6 major laws that are covering the rent, but still it's important to read your contract. Usually the contract is for 1 year, and at the end of 1 year it's very important to know whether the contract is prolonged automatically by an agreement in the contract, or whether you have to sign a new contract, or whether you have to sign an amendment. I've dealt with some questions about this recently. So it's important to know how the rent will continue after this 1 year.
Okay.
Ask at the very beginning, not at the end of that year. So ask.
Yeah, but at the beginning, people are usually in that state of, oh God, I found an apartment. I don't care about anything else. Finally, I found an apartment that I like.
I know. And it's difficult. It's very difficult to negotiate about the contract if you are happy that you have a place to stay.
Yeah,
you just take it as it is.
The rent increase, God, let's get into that. The rent increase. So exactly how and when can a landlord increase rent?
The amount of rent is based on agreement of both parties at the beginning of the contract. And this cannot be changed from the side of the landlord only, with one exception, and that is if there is an inflation clause. But again, the inflation clause has to be perfect. Exact wording. If it is vague or not well stated in the contract, it cannot be used. So inflation clause is the only one when landlord can raise the rent during the contract without the consent of the tenant.
And how many times can the landlord increase the rent in 1 year?
It's stated in the inflation clause, and it's usually only once a year. It's not that every month when the inflation is known, so the landlord comes and says, well, you pay 1,000 more and next one 1,000 more. It cannot be like this. It has to be agreed in the contract. And sometimes the inflation clause is like from 1st of January. Sometimes it's like once a year in 12 months. So if you start the contract in March, you increase the rent in March. But the thing is that if your contract is for 12 months and there's no prolongation clause, it ends after these 12 months and you have to conclude a new contract. So again, the landlord can raise the rent because it's a new contract and you are starting from the very beginning negotiating the rent again.
Yeah, but
I hear that. Difficult.
I hear that. Before I continue, can you just give a clue of what the clause usually says about inflation? Does it say exactly like, okay, every time inflation rises, I will raise the price by this certain percentage, or based on the percentage of the inflation, or it just says when inflation rises, I will raise it once, maybe.
Yeah. Again, based on the inflation clause in the contract, and it has to state exactly which inflation, because there are more types of inflation, and it has to state how many times a year or to which date it can be used. And there's maximum of 20%, but the law says that the rent cannot be raised for more than 20% in 3 years.
You do realize landlords are raising 30-40%.
Yeah, but well, if there's a tenant whose landlord raised the rent for 30 or 40%, let me know, and we will deal with that, because it's not legal. It's too much.
Oh wow!
Because the inflation is 15, so they cannot raise for
Doesn't make
40% because it's not the inflation. Yeah, I know this is crazy, but this is not legal, and we shall prevent these situations.
And the increase, what exactly can they increase? Do they increase the rent of the apartment, or they also increase the extra cost?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is what we have discussed was about rent. The rent can be raised by inflation. But the extra cost, the utility costs for electricity, gas, water, this can be raised anytime when the costs of these are raised by the company, the supplier company. So if electricity company says now the electricity price is double because of the situation on the market, so the landlord can raise the monthly payments immediately to double because he cannot influence this. He is just like in the middle of the chain of the supply.
But what if in the situation where the tenant says, I can see in my meter, I can see how much I'm using, and it still hasn't really changed much, but the landlord is raising the extra costs, like the utility costs, like way beyond what it should be.
So again, this should be advance payment that you are paying, and
So
there should be a settlement based on the exact consumption. So if you keep your consumption low, so at the end you will get the money back because you will not use the whole amount you were paying as advance.
And the landlord has a right to give you that at the end of the year to show you.
Yes, you have obligation to see all the papers from the supply company, the settlement. The landlord has to provide you with these documents.
Okay.
So you can check whether it's.
So the deposit. Yes, many landlords, are refusing to give tenants their deposits back. They will state anything everywhere to say why they're not giving back the deposit, from or we damaged furniture which is not clearly damaged. Reasons that don't even make any sense because they don't want to give the deposit, and it gets even worse when the tenant is an expat and they have left the country already.
I know this is one of my most popular. What to do when you start your rent? You take pictures of every detail of the property. But I mean, like of all the walls, all the floors, all the tiles in the bathroom, so that you prove how the state was at the beginning of the rent. And when you finish, again, you take the same pictures of the same places to prove whether it is usual wear and tear that is stated by law, or whether it's too much. I don't know, the floor can be damaged because there's a big dog on the floor, a cat, so if you live there for a longer time, the tenant has obligation by law to do some minor repairs, including like painting the walls. So if you live there for 1 year, so it could be considered as usual wear and tear. But if you live there for 10 years, you have legal obligation to do the painting. And I've experienced that there are landlords asking people to do painting of the walls like after 6 months.
Yeah.
Again, it's not correct.
Actually, I think they say you paint every time you leave. It doesn't matter how long you've been living there, which means these walls are repainted and repainted every after 6 months. If someone lives for 6 months or 1 year, they keep repainting them.
It's implemented in rent agreements so that it's an obligation stated by the agreement, and the tenant has no choice than to agree. That's how it is. If it is in the contract, then the tenant has the obligation to repay it.
Yeah, so basically the story of refusal of deposits, it's better to hire a lawyer in these cases because they usually don't give them back without a lawyer, right?
What I can see that landlords usually say, well, it's like, I don't know, 5,000, 10,000, 15,000, so the tenant will not sue me for this money, so I'm going to keep it. And it's very difficult for tenants to hire a lawyer if they know, so they would pay the same fee to the lawyer and they get this money back. So this is what the landlords are profiting of. But I had some cases where we got the money back, and the landlord, if he loses the case, so he has to pay all the court charges and all these extra costs. So it costs him much more money than to just returning the deposit. So when we start the proceeding of asking for the deposit, it usually works enough to get the deposit back.
This is just...
I know this is crazy, and it's not going to get better until tenants really ask through lawyers for this deposit.
This is a scam.
Well, we have a very, very huge percentage of success in getting the deposit back, even without the court proceeding. Because when the landlord see that the tenant has hired a lawyer, so they change their approach and they just give the money back, because they know they would have to pay much more if there's a court proceeding.
So if I come to you and I say my landlord is refusing with my deposit, in your letter to the landlord, do you put that clause that he will be liable for all the charges?
Yes, of course. It's stated by law, so I just repeat what is stated
That is good.
And I also, what we do, we ask for late payment interest that raises the amount. And if the tenant is willing to dig more into the situation, so we find out that the yearly settlement were given to him late, so there's a penalty for every day. And we have found out in one of our cases that there was like almost a year delay in getting this document. So if you count the amount per day for a year, so it's just these amounts that tenants usually don't ask for, but they're entitled to. So if I put them on one letter and I calculate it, one more thing, that tenants are entitled for interest from the deposit for the whole time. So it's not only these like 10 or 15,000 for deposit or 20, but it's so this makes the amount like a double or triple, and that makes the landlord to give the money back immediately, because otherwise he would have to pay.
I really advise people to see a lawyer.
Like no one is willing to approach a lawyer, but it's in some situations it's very much worse to just pay for the lawyer's consultation, because it can save you a lot of money. We had one case that it was about yearly settlement. The landlord asked our client for almost 30,000 to pay, and we just went into the calculations and we found out that it was only 1,800. And then we have added all these extra interest, late payment penalties and all these, and it just at the end we were asking the landlord to pay money to the tenant. But at the beginning it was the courage of the tenant to consult with a lawyer, because 30,000 seemed too much to them.
That is awesome. Wow. People should really go for a lawyer. I mean, I understand that it's hard to take that step to find a lawyer, especially when you are an expat, because the last thing you want to do is to be involved with legalities and law stuff in a foreign country. You always try to play things by the rule, by the book, stay in the lines, because you never know what could happen. So I understand their fear to pursue.
I understand that too. If it is about 5,000, it's just, you should not care. But if it is like 10,000, 15,000, and you dig more into the details, you find out it's much more, and you just can get your money back.
I'm so proud of these women I see putting posts about the fact that they're looking for a lawyer to pursue their deposit, because it tells me that they're brave. They have decided we are not going to tolerate this kind of treatment from landlords just because we are women and foreigners. We are going to pursue and show them that we are strong and we can do this. So I'm really proud of them. I wish a lot of women could follow suit and go in the steps of those women.
Yeah, and in most cases it even does not go till the court.
Yeah.
It's just settled before by a mutual agreement in the European Union. There's a good cooperation regarding these legal issues and court proceedings, so it's becoming much more easier to sue someone from another country of the EU.
Yeah, but you have dead country nationals.
Yeah, for third country nationals it's different.
Oh well, so my advice is go seek Martina for help when the landlord refuses with your money, because these people are just something else. Now, let's get into the eviction. You fail to conform to what the landlord suddenly says to you, and next thing you know, they're serving you with an eviction notice to leave in 2 weeks. And you're like, what? How did we get there? How can we not communicate like adults and find common ground before you just telling me I should vacate in 2 weeks? It's not even legal to live in 2 weeks. So when it comes to the eviction, how long can a tenant say, please vacate my premises? Do they give notice just as when you are supposed to give notice when you leave, 3 months notice?
Yeah, this pretty much depends whether you have a lease agreement or sublease agreement.
Okay. Let's start with the lease agreement.
Lease agreement means you have direct contract with the landlord, the owner of the property. So you have all your tenant rights. And if you have a contract for limited period of time, mostly 1 year, so there are only a few reasons when the landlord can give you a notice. These are stated by law. This is if you are late with your rent for more than three months, or if you are causing a huge damage to the property, and some other, but these are the most important. And if you are not doing any of these, so you cannot get a termination notice, and the contract is valid for the whole year or 2 years.
But they do.
Again, this is not legal and search for legal protection. Again, the same applies for the tenant. If the tenant concludes the contract for 1 year, so the contract is binding for 1 year. And there is only one way to terminate the contract before this 1 year for the tenant, and this is if the situation of the tenant changes in such a way that he cannot be obliged to stay in the same property. Meaning, like, the tenant gets a job in another country, so he's allowed to leave the flat before this 1 year. Or, I don't know, if the tenant loses working visa or something like this, a serious situation that you could not expect, for which you cannot stay for the whole period of the contract.
What if you are changing jobs and you are working on the other side of a different Prague, maybe Prague 7, Prague 4, something like that, and it's really hard to travel. It's like 40 minutes, 50 minutes, an hour to get there, and you want to find a place closer.
This is not serious enough, because through Prague you can travel. Even if you have a job just in the surrounding villages or cities close to Prague with good connection, so you just can commuting every day to your job. If you have a job in Brno and you know it's like 3 hours one way, so this is a serious reason. But if it takes you like 50 minutes instead of 30, it's not a reason to change your contract, unless you agree with your landlord.
Okay, what if the apartment is just giving unlivable conditions for you? Sometimes you sign a contract, you move in, and 2 weeks into living in this new apartment, you find things that you cannot tolerate. It's unbreathable, it's moldy, I can't sleep, it's giving me terrors. Like, there's so many things that can happen, and I feel like I cannot live in this apartment any longer. Is there like a 3 months trial period, just like you do when you have a new job, where I can be like, okay, I'm sorry, I need to leave?
Again, it depends on the situation. If it is moldy in the way that you cannot stay in the property, of course, you can move out. You do not have to pay the rent, you just terminate the contract, because you cannot be obliged to stay in the property where it's a hazard for your health. If you, I don't know, choose the property and you find out in 1 or 2 weeks that there's heavy traffic under your windows and you just don't like it, this is not a reason enough, because you could have found out when moving into the property that it's on a street with heavy traffic.
If it's hazardous to my health, like I'm coughing and I can't breathe, do I have to prove when I terminate the contract so I can get my deposit back?
Yes, of course, you have to prove that this is happening, and the landlord would have to come to see. And
it's really hard to prove that, right?
Yes, of course, but it depends on the exact situation of the property. If the landlord knows there's a mold in the flat and he does not do anything about it, he just signs a contract with you and you find out, so there's a reason to terminate the contract, because you cannot live in such conditions.
I have seen a lot of cases where tenants will fail to abide by what the landlord is saying because it sounds ridiculous. For example, say I'm raising rent for the second time now by 30%, and you're like, okay, you know what, can we negotiate about this? And instead of negotiating, the landlord just says, okay, vacate my premises in 2 weeks. There's this situation you talked about earlier of a contract expiring at the end of the year and not communicating prior if we can renew it or not. You go to the landlord to talk about renewing the contract, and the landlord says, no, we are not, so you need to move at the end of the month, without any explanation, even though you've been paying your rent on time, being a good tenant, and they just don't give any explanation.
Yeah, you have to be careful when your contract is ending and make sure if you want to stay, so make sure that your landlord will prolong your contract.
Yeah.
It's up to each tenant to just take care of this situation, not to leave it at the very end, because at the very end it's very difficult to negotiate. But if you come to negotiate like 3 months in advance, so you are much more likely to prolong the contract and stay at the property. Also important for the landlord, because if he knows 3 months in advance, he would have to look for a new tenant. So it's another situation than if you stay in the property till the very last day. He does not know whether you are moving out the next day or whether you are staying. So it's for the better security of both parties. In general, it's 3 months notice. It's just not that the landlord comes and says, I'm raising your rent and you have to leave in 2 weeks. It's not legal again.
They just do whatever they want. So you were saying if a landlord evicts you outside of those 2 legal reasons that you mentioned, you have a right to hire a lawyer or something, because they usually threaten like, I'm going to lock you out and lock your properties inside if you don't evict in 2 weeks or in a month.
Yeah, this is a threat, but it's not legal. Even the first letter from a lawyer can help the landlord to realize what he's doing and not to proceed with this.
I wonder if this happens with Czech tenants, does it? Or it's only mostly with expat tenants?
No, it happens to Czech people as well. It's not something that's happening only to expats, because if you have a bad landlord, so he's acting badly towards Czech people.
Let's end with this one, subleases and roommates. Sometimes you have a roommate from hell and you want to kick them out, but you don't know if you're protected by the contract or not. How does that work with roommates and subleases?
Yeah, with sublease, you have the owner, landlord, main tenant, and the sublease. And by sublease, you are just very much depending on the main contract. Like it's very common situation. There are like three friends subleasing a property, and they stay together. Each of them has his or her own room. It can be in the name of one of them, and the 2 others are just having a contract with this one. Or the sublease or the lease can be with all 3 of them.
Okay.
But mostly it's one person that is responsible for the whole property and subleasing it rooms to others. And it very much depends what is in the sublease contract. Let's just make sure that these people pay and have a really good contract with these people. If they don't pay, they have to move out. And as it is a sublease, there's not such a strong protection from the civil code. There is no like 3 months termination notice. It will be like 15 days. You not pay, you go out because I have to pay to my landlord.
True.
And I just cannot keep you in the property without paying because I cannot afford it.
I think it probably works better with students. Yeah.
Yes.
Wow, this has been very helpful. You know, maybe it will save a lot of people from this landlords from hell and roommates from hell. But before you go, can you just please tell us where people can find you? And before then, also I'm very curious, normally how much do lawyers charge when you go first time to just ask for advice on what steps to take between you and your landlord?
You can see all my fees on my web, like my name, Martina Kačerová, CZ. Or you can go to Facebook to Martina Real Estate Lawyer, and there you find link to my web, and you can see all my packages that I'm offering. I have like the smallest package is called Just One Question.
Okay.
So you can have this one, or you can, if you know it's like a bigger issue, for example with the deposit, and it's getting complicated, so I have special packages. So I'm not only charging like per hour, but I have offering these packages.
Oh, that's better.
And what I have for tenants, I have drafted a document. It's called 5 pieces of advice for tenants, and I have picked like the 5 most important information each tenant should know before signing a contract, and it's for free. You can download it from my web.
Nice.
So I'm inviting everyone to download this document and to follow these rules, because it can save a lot of hassle and a lot of problems in the future. From my 20 years experience, I'm collecting, so I'm just offering this for everyone who is interested.
Yes, thank you so much for coming. This was very, very helpful, especially because, you know, you're a busy person, you charge for this kind of services, and here you are just, you know, giving information for free to anyone who listens. We should be glad. I am glad you came.
Yeah, thank you for the invitation, and thank you for all your questions.
Thank you for listening to to this episode. If you want to be a part of our Dear Ladies Network community, visit our website www.dearladiesnet.com or follow our socials on Instagram and Facebook at dearladies.network. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss new episodes. Until next time.